April of 1912, cranes lowered a heavy wooden crate into the dark bowels of the most famous ship in history. Inside rested the absolute pinnacle of terrestrial engineering, a brand new European automobile with 0 miles on the odometer, sealed tight in cargo hold number 2. It would never touch American asphalt. Days later, when Atlantic ice scraped the side of the hull below the waterline, the ocean invaded that exact compartment. Dark water swallowed the machine in minutes, long before most passengers even woke up. Today, at a crushing depth of 12,500 feet, this environment remains blocked by twisted iron. It stands as the greatest enigma in underwater exploration, an inaccessible vault isolated in the absolute silence of the seafloor. When submersibles descend to the abyssal plain of the North Atlantic, their powerful camera spotlights almost always hunt for the same ghosts. The lenses glide slowly across the remains of the grand staircase, searching for a distant echo of luxury. They illuminate the silent brass telegraphs on the bridge. It is human nature to seek out these great landmarks. However, the true time capsule of that April night in 1912 was never in the ballrooms. The most perfectly preserved vault of that era lay far below the passengers' shoes, far from the orchestras and the glow of chandeliers. At the structural base of that giant were the orlop decks, a restricted area immersed in deep shadows. It was dominated by the low, heavy rumble of the boilers and the endless vibration of the massive propellers. This was the steel belly of the ship. It was designed specifically to guard the most exclusive luggage and high-value cargo crossing the ocean. What we will do here is a rigorous investigation of the most isolated compartment in the entire wreck. We are going to understand how engineering built a fortress that became, in a matter of seconds, an inescapable trap. Popular memory often focuses on the chaotic launching of the lifeboats and the freezing air on the upper deck, but the structural rupture of this colossus began mercilessly in the deep. When the mountain of ice scraped the right side of the hull, well below the waterline, it did not hit cabins full of sleeping people. The front line of that force of nature was exactly cargo hold number 2. The absurd water pressure invading the vessel transformed an armored logistical space into a scene of instant collapse. The dark sea took the space so aggressively that it sealed the fate of everything inside. It happened long before the first alarms even had a chance to sound. Immobilized in the center of that compartment, surrounded by shattered crates and water under immense pressure, was the most expensive European automobile on board. In the following segments, we will dive into the surgical and rarely discussed details of that early morning. We will understand the terrifying physics of how that restricted space broke apart. We will look at the forgotten documents that later proved this treasure existed, and we will explore the extreme difficulty modern missions face when trying to reach this twisted iron in the pitch black. If you appreciate the recovery of true historical facts structured with respect for memory and without narrative shortcuts, I ask that you subscribe to the channel. Take this moment to leave a comment telling us what city or country you are watching from. We make it a point to know our viewers, and we love to read and answer every comment from our community. Pay close attention to these next details. The exact position of that vehicle at the moment of impact profoundly changes how we understand the very first wound the ship suffered. To grasp the true gravity of what rests at the bottom of the ocean today, we need to forget the brightly lit decks. We must descend the narrow metal stairs down to the very roots of the ship. Far below the salons, lined with thick carpets, below the massive kitchens, and even below the giant boiling furnaces that fed the engines, the geography of the steel colossus changed drastically. The environment lost every single trace of human comfort. Down there was the orlop deck, and inside it, the deeply isolated cargo hold number 2. This was no ordinary storage room. It was a severely restricted area, a structural fortress built into the deepest part of the bow, tucked perfectly into the narrow curve of the hull, many feet below the waterline. Sunlight never reached those oppressive corridors. Illumination depended entirely on dim, incandescent bulbs, protected by heavy iron grates, throwing long, ghostly shadows across the cold metal floor. The air at this level was thick. It carried a permanent, suffocating smell of industrial grease, raw canvas, hemp ropes, and a strong trace of the sea salt beating against the steel outside. It was into this hostile environment that crane operators at the port of Southampton lowered the most fascinating material item of that entire crossing. Transatlantic automobile transport in the early 20th century was a colossal logistical nightmare. Back then, engineering did not allow you to simply drive a vehicle into the belly of a ship on the ramps we know today. European cars of that period were rustic, immensely heavy, and complex. They were treated as true mechanical trophies. The vehicle in question was the absolute pinnacle of terrestrial engineering. It was purchased by a highly influential first-class magnate who demanded his precious machine cross the Atlantic with maximum protection. The technical preparation for this journey required meticulous, back-breaking labor from the English dock workers. To completely eliminate the risk of physical damage caused by the constant rolling of a rough sea, the automobile had to be partially dismantled right there on the docks. The heavy wheels, built with reinforced wooden spokes, were removed from the axles one by one. They were tied firmly to the sides of the main chassis. The brilliant brass headlights and the most fragile ornaments were packed securely in bundles of dry straw and thick fabric. And, following a strict rule of naval safety, every vital fluid in the machine, including thick oils and highly flammable fuels, was drained down to the very last drop. This eliminated any structural risk of fire in that confined sector. Next, the imposing iron carcass, housing its luxurious seats, lined in refined leather, was locked inside a gigantic, unforgiving containment crate. It was a structure built from thick, solid wood planks and heavy steel nails. The main crane at the port groaned loudly under the weight of several tons. It hoisted this monumental box high over the open deck and lowered it inches at a time down the dark cargo shaft. Upon hitting the floor of hold number 2, with a violent thud, workers anchored the massive crate to the cold steel deck. They pulled thick chains and heavy ropes tight, tensioned right to the absolute limit of human strength. The final result of this brutal operation was the creation of an impenetrable capsule inside another capsule. A blind wooden vault sealed in total darkness, locked securely inside the ship's own reinforced steel vault. Logistical rules dictated that this environment had to remain isolated and absolutely untouchable. The master plan was perfect. Upon arriving safely at the port of New York, the heavy box would be hoisted back up into the sunlight. The automobile would have its wheels reinstalled, the fluids would be carefully refilled, and the ultimate symbol of European luxury would finally roll elegantly across American cobblestone streets. During the calm early days of the crossing, the hold remained plunged in a quiet, almost religious gloom. No passenger or low-ranking crew member had clearance to walk through that sector without an official order. It was the dark kingdom of untouchable luggage. It was sealed off by thick, watertight doors that guaranteed the promise of absolute protection against the hostile nature dragging right outside the hull. While musicians played soothing melodies many feet above and crystal glasses clinked on first-class dining tables, the only sound reaching the hold was the constant, low, rhythmic vibration of the propellers pushing that mountain of steel through the waters of the North Atlantic. Yet, there was a dark irony hidden in the architecture of that space. To ensure the vessel's central stability and keep dense freight away from living quarters, naval engineers positioned hold number 2 at the very front end of the bow. By trying to protect the ship from the weight of the cargo, the designers placed that magnificent luxury automobile directly on the initial impact line. That resistant sidewall of steel, separating the wood from the freezing immensity of the ocean, would not be an impenetrable shield. It was only a matter of days before that physical barrier would become the exact point where the monumental pressure of nature would permanently crush human confidence. It was exactly 20 minutes before midnight on that freezing Sunday. Up in the crow's nest, dozens of feet above the main deck, the lookouts tried to pierce the absolute darkness of the North Atlantic, relying solely on their own eyesight. Without the help of spyglasses or binoculars, their wind-battered faces fought against human limits. Then, a colossal shadow blocked out the starry horizon. The piercing rings of the warning bell immediately echoed through the bridge, triggering urgent orders from the watch officer to throw the engines in reverse and turn the ship. But the steel behemoth, moving at nearly 25 miles per hour, carried an unforgiving inertia. The emergency maneuver just was not fast enough. The mountain of ice did not strike the bow head-on. Instead, it glided along the right side, delivering a continuous, deafening, and fatal scrape just below the waterline. For the vast majority of passengers comfortably settled in the upper decks, this encounter with the force of nature felt almost entirely harmless. Later accounts described the physical sensation as a slight vibration. It was a mechanical shudder that barely managed to shake the ornamental chandeliers or rattle the glasses on the nightstands. However, the reality dozens of feet down was one of absolute brutality. Hold number 2 was not just a compartment that suffered a gradual, slow leak. It was the true, physical front line of that Titanic clash. It was right there, on those cold, riveted walls, that the physics of the impact claimed its very first toll. When the submerged wall of thousands of tons of ice pressed against the outer hull, the thick naval steel plates did not shatter like glass. Under the monumental pressure, they simply gave way and buckled inward. The massive iron rivets holding the plates together blew out of their positions. They popped with the ballistic force and the dry crack of heavy artillery fire. The exact instant the hull's integrity failed, the oppressive silence of the cargo hold was annihilated by a continuous, terrifying roar. This was not a standard flood. This was the ocean itself, invading a confined space under extreme pressure. It blasted through the torn seams with the fury of a collapsed dam. Can you conceive the kinetic violence of that single moment? Salt water, hovering right at the freezing point, swept through the space in mere seconds. The massive solid wood crate housing the luxurious European automobile, despite being firmly anchored to the steel floor, became a fragile obstacle against the overwhelming volume of the sea. The force of the current hurled hundreds of heavy mailbags and trunks from one side to the other. The structure protecting the vehicle quickly collapsed under the crushing weight and speed of the water. The reinforced boards smashed into pieces. They immediately exposed the heavy brass headlights, the refined upholstery, and the strong iron chassis to the merciless aggression of the Atlantic. The historical irony cemented in those few minutes is silent and profound. The most modern, expensive, and desired machine of its time, designed specifically to accelerate across solid land, met its absolute end before a single human being on board understood the true gravity of the disaster. The automobile was completely submerged, swallowed by the heavy darkness of the hold, hours before the giant's bow even began its irreversible tilt toward the bottom. It sank long before the ship broke in half and dragged the stern down into the final abyss. If we step away from this metallic claustrophobia for a brief moment and look at the scene from outside the hull, the image reveals a breath of terrifying beauty, the vast ocean, dark and perfectly glass-smooth, the majestic silhouette of the floating giant, illuminated by thousands of electric lights, its 4 imposing funnels blowing smoke against a brilliantly starry sky, a vision of absolute serenity and power that completely masked the lethal blow already dominating its guts. In that initial midnight calm, while officers were still trying to measure the damage and the band had not yet played its first note of warning, hold number 2 had already been entirely conquered by the sea. The vehicle's capsule became the very first major prisoner of the waters. And the only reason we know with surgical precision that this mechanical treasure rests down there in the dark is because of a simple, unusual piece of paper that would surface months later. When the pale sun finally lit the calm waters on the morning of April 15th, the massive mountain of steel had completely vanished. All that remained were small wooden lifeboats floating in a sea covered with debris and silence. Among the rescued people from first class, wrapped tightly in heavy blankets and staring out at the empty horizon, was the influential American magnate, the owner of that luxurious automobile. He had managed to secure a last-minute seat, finding shelter and surviving the tragedy that dragged over 1,500 souls into the darkened depths of the ocean. The transition from the initial shock to the coldness of the real world was rapid and unforgiving. While families across the globe mourned a human loss of previously unimaginable proportions, the bureaucratic gears of the modern era began turning almost immediately. Just weeks after the catastrophe, in the quiet, elegant offices of New York and London, collective grief started sharing space on large oak desks with contracts, insurance policies, and endless indemnity forms. The disaster was now taking on a dimension of paper and ink. It was precisely within this cold, administrative context that the document emerged, a document that would forever change the archaeology of the shipwreck. The vehicle's owner, acting through his legal representatives, filed a massive marine insurance claim. The demand was incredibly straightforward. He wanted an exact reimbursement of $5,000 for the total loss of his newly purchased machine. At that point in history, $5,000 represented a colossal fortune. It was enough money to buy highly valuable real estate or even an entire fleet of common vehicles. The harsh contrast between the financial demand and the sheer magnitude of the human disaster was glaring. It was a stark demonstration of how the elite of that era dealt with the sudden disappearance of their material wealth. However, for the historians and engineers who would investigate the case a long time later, the financial value claimed held absolutely no relevance. The real prize was the piece of paper attached to that demand. To prove to the insurance company that the loss was legitimate, the lawyers had to attach the official shipping documentation. They presented the authorities with the original cargo manifest from the shipping line, a simple typewritten document that had been officially stamped and validated by the port officers in Southampton just days before the fateful departure. That yellowed piece of paper was much more than a simple customs receipt. It acted as a text-based X-ray of the ship's deepest guts. The manifest detailed, with mathematical precision, the dimensions of the heavy wooden containment crate. It listed the exact weight of the iron chassis, the additional parts that had been removed for the voyage, and most importantly of all, the exact indisputable location of the cargo. The fine print officially confirmed that the vehicle had been anchored and sealed completely inside cargo hold number 2, located strictly in the bow of the vessel. Do you realize the invaluable weight of this documentary revelation? As the decades rolled on and the memories of the survivors aged and faded with time, many stories about the inside of the ship dissolved into urban legends. Rumors about hidden vaults, packed with undocumented art, and priceless jewels always flooded the popular imagination. But the automobile, resting in the dark, was no myth. The insurance document turned into the ultimate treasure map for underwater engineering. It provided the hard, material proof, stamped and fully signed, that the machine was truly on board, parked in the exact area where the ice had delivered its first devastating blow. That document survived the ultimate test of time. It sat quietly in locked filing cabinets, waiting for the era when human technology would finally be capable of lighting up the abyssal darkness. That cold $5,000 receipt would be the main catalyst feeding a scientific obsession. It would push modern researchers to pour fortunes into advanced robotics and naval engineering. The future mission would no longer be just about recording the general state of the steel ruins. The goal shifted. They wanted to descend through a collapsed metallic labyrinth under crushing pressure, simply to prove that the iron carcass of that vehicle remained in the pitch black, right in the exact spot where the paperwork said the journey ended. The transition from a securely stored insurance document on dry land to the harsh reality of the seafloor required a massive technological leap, a leap that humanity took almost an entire century to achieve. When the first exploration expeditions finally touched down on the abyssal plain, at exactly 12,500 feet deep, scientists ran right into a logistical nightmare. The bow of the steel giant did not land softly on the ocean floor. It plummeted at a terrifying speed through the water column and slammed into the ground with indescribable violence. It drove itself dozens of feet deep into the dense, freezing mud of the North Atlantic. And it is precisely within this collision dynamic that the hunt for the legendary European automobile hits a monumental architectural wall. Remember how cargo hold number 2 was designed into the structural base of the vessel, as low beneath the waterline as possible? That means in the current geography of the wreck, this section is not just resting on the bottom of the sea. It is, in large part, buried straight under the ocean floor itself. It is shielded by thousands of tons of sediment that completely swallowed the keel and the lower sides of the hull. The only possible route of access is not through an open exterior gap. It requires a surgical infiltration through the very inside of the Colossus, a dizzying descent through a maze of metal that collapses just a little bit more every single day. To attempt penetrating this unattainable vault, modern research relies entirely on remotely operated vehicles. These are small, highly sophisticated submarine robots, tethered to the surface by thick, fiber-optic umbilical cables. They are equipped with ultra-high-definition cameras and articulated mechanical arms. Up on the surface, aboard massive oceanographic ships, the atmosphere inside the piloting cabins is one of absolute apprehension. There is absolutely no room for relaxation. The operators maintain severe expressions. Their faces are perfectly normal, intensely focused, marked heavily by tension, and completely empty of smiles. They are lit only by the cold, blue glow of the navigation monitors. They are flying equipment worth tens of millions of dollars straight into total darkness. Every tiny adjustment on the joystick demands mathematical precision. The smallest miscalculation could tangle the robot in the wreckage forever. Navigating the orlop decks is a deeply claustrophobic and highly dangerous journey. The extremely sensitive camera lenses reveal a nightmare scenario where chemistry and pressure have completely rewritten the original architecture. The iron ceilings that once protected the wide hallways have caved under their own massive weight, partially collapsing and creating terrifying narrow bottlenecks. Thick electrical conduits, which once distributed light and civilizing power, now hang from the torn ceiling like hidden traps, ready to swallow the propulsion propellers of the submarines. The original steel floor is gone, buried under a deep layer of calcareous ooze. The walls are completely consumed by vast biological formations of rust. These dense structures hang like stalactites of melted metal and are incredibly volatile. Just the invisible displacement of water caused by the robot's thrusters can make them crumble, kicking up impenetrable clouds of dark dust that blind the camera lenses in fractions of a second. Pushing forward level after level means leaving behind any shred of light from the external spotlights. It means diving into vertical drop shafts where spatial disorientation is instant. To get anywhere near the doors of the cargo hold, the robotic vehicle has to zigzag through the mangled debris of the old elevator shafts. It has to bypass barricades of watertight doors twisted by implosion. It must hunt for structural cracks just a few inches wide in the rubble. It is an exhausting operation that burns through hours of silent, agonizing progress. The surrounding structure is a dead entity, yet completely unstable. It groans and shifts under the pull of deep ocean tides. What makes the hunt even worse is that the metal skeleton loses its structural integrity year after year. An access route perfectly mapped out by an expedition one year might simply be wiped out by tons of collapsed steel by the time the next mission arrives. Up to the present moment, the very rare incursions that dared push the absolute limits of this exclusion zone have only brought back shadowy images of foggy debris. The tension of piloting a remote machine just inches away from the most coveted automobile in investigative history is draining. The small robot hovers in the pitch black. Its beams of light slice through the stagnant water, highlighting shapes beneath the mud that hint at the rigid outline of a spoked wheel, the slope of a fender, or the dull gleam of a component that absolutely refuses to be forgotten. Yet definitive access to the core of hold number 2 remains firmly sealed off. It is blocked by a formidable barricade of crushed metal and century-old sediment. That deep environment defends its final occupant with an absolute iron-fisted resistance. And while robotic missions fight to map out this submerged labyrinth, a deeply methodical doubt haunts historians. After over a century of non-stop corrosion in the most aggressive chemical environment on Earth, what is the actual physical condition of the machinery still sleeping under the mud? When we try to picture the inside of that steel behemoth today, the human mind naturally tends to create a comforting image. We imagine objects perfectly aligned and completely untouched, waiting patiently for a heroic rescue. But the reality at 12,500 feet deep is governed by unforgiving laws and a silent biology. Cargo hold number 2 stopped being a human logistical compartment more than a century ago. It transformed into a brutal, natural chemical reactor. Time operates in a deeply insensitive way on the seafloor. What is left of that magnificent European automobile offers a grim reflection of the power of this hostile environment. To understand the current state of the machinery trapped in that wreckage, we have to look at how the deep ocean slowly devours the old works of engineering. That monumental protective crate, built from thick wooden planks to survive the Atlantic crossing, was the very first thing to fail. Decades ago, the ravenous microbes that rule the abyssal plains, creatures specializing in consuming absolutely any trace of organic matter, erased every single structural fiber of those original boards. Along with the protective shell, all the luxurious upholstery lining the inside of the vehicle, and the fine, decorative wooden trim were slowly and permanently dissolved. Every ounce of comfort designed for the passengers was wiped out forever. Stripped entirely of its wooden armor and its interior luxuries, what the sea finally reached was the raw core of the vehicle. The heavy iron chassis, the intricate gears of the engine, and the robust transmission box are completely unrecognizable today. They have been overrun by the exact same colonies of bacteria that are actively eating away the ship's entire skeleton. This metallic structure is heavily coated in thick biological formations that hang like dark rust stalactites. The relentless activity of these microorganisms has physically fused the automobile right into the neighboring debris. It transformed an elegant machine into an organic extension of the ship's own floor. The vehicle is literally welding itself to the vessel, buried deep under extreme pressure and the endless rain of wreckage that plummeted from the upper decks over the decades. However, it is right here, in the unequal way materials react to ocean chemistry, that science finds its greatest fascination. While iron loses its original shape and wood vanishes without a single trace, very specific components fight back. They resist the severity of the environment with a spectacular stubbornness. The exquisite headlights, forged from solid brass, along with the bronze levers and gears, do not suffer the same aggressive corrosion as the steel. The total lack of atmospheric oxygen, combined with the molecular traits of these noble metals, allows them to keep their integrity almost entirely intact in the dark. Even more mind-blowing is the ultimate fate of the vehicle's foundation. Back in that era, those massive tires did not rely on fragile air-filled inner tubes. They were built from thick, heavy blocks of solid, vulcanized rubber. Forensic analyses of other artifacts pulled from the debris strongly suggest that this dense, synthetic composition is nearly immune to the biological attacks of the deep sea. That means, buried deep beneath thick layers of calcareous ooze and eaten iron, the thick bands of rubber that never once rolled down the streets of America are still physically supporting the weight of that mechanical carcass. The final realization about this isolated environment carries a truly ghostly weight. The European machine, masterfully designed to celebrate speed and man's absolute dominance over nature, was instantly paralyzed by the oldest force on the planet. The ghost of this vehicle remains parked in the exact spot where its journey ended. It has transformed into a dark statue, completely frozen in time. Nature turned that sealed cargo hold into its own private vault. It permanently claimed the prize that old insurance papers proved was really there. But the ocean, in its impenetrable vastness, is never going to hand it back to the surface. That automobile, immobilized underneath thousands of tons of twisted rubble, silently and absolutely represents so much more than just a piece of valuable cargo lost to the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. It crystallizes the single greatest, most crushing irony of the entire disaster on that April morning in 1912. The vehicle was conceived down to the tiniest detail as the absolute symbol of the modern era's bold advance. It was a refined machine, meticulously crafted by the brightest minds in Europe to deliver speed, to devour massive distances on newly paved avenues, and above all else, to aggressively reaffirm man's unquestionable dominance over the wild. Yet that entire promise of rapid, endless motion was shut down in an instant. It was paralyzed by the brute, ancient, and completely silent force of a hidden mountain of ice. The absolute pinnacle of terrestrial engineering never found the glory of American asphalt. Instead, it was reduced to a phantom artifact, trapped forever on the darkest, coldest, and most inhospitable plain on Earth. As 21st century technology advances in spectacular ways, tiny, incredibly expensive submarine robots stubbornly continue to map whatever is left of the great steel colossus. Armed with ultra-precision lenses and beams of light that rip right through the pitch-black abyss, they light up the collapsed decks. They scour the empty first-class lounges, rescuing the visual memory of that unforgettable night. But cargo hold number 2 relentlessly defies modern curiosity. That hold, now entirely sealed shut by heavy plates of contorted steel, fused together by marine biology, and buried under countless tons of ocean sediment, defends its territory with an unshakable grip. It keeps its ultimate prize right there, just a few feet away from the camera lenses, But physically, structurally, and painfully, it remains completely out of human reach. The vastness of the sea devoured the massive vessel once and for all. The unforgiving water swallowed the majestically lit hallways. It paralyzed the colossal engines that once made the floors vibrate. It permanently silenced the absolute chaos and desperation that took over the upper deck. Yet, the great mechanical mystery, that hidden treasure of iron and brass that sank long before the ship took its fatal plunge, remains perfectly intact inside its own private tomb. Without ever touching a single inch of the asphalt it was destined for, the most coveted European vehicle of its time rests in absolute silence. It is not just a piece of rusted metal. It is a haunting monument to the very limits of human ambition. It is parked perpetually in the deep dark, completely cut off from the flow of time, and forever unreachable to the world above. Try to measure the true weight of that reality, while the world above keeps right on spinning, while entire empires fall and technology evolves far beyond anything the builders of that ship could have ever dreamed of. The automobile rests in an eternal night. There is no wind, there is no sunlight, there is absolutely no sound. There is only the slow, methodical work of bacteria eating away at the steel, and the crushing pressure keeping the vault door firmly shut. It is an armored mausoleum. Modern rescue engineering can only peek through the cracks, knowing full well that any aggressive attempt to break in would guarantee the structural destruction of the very artifact they want to save. The irony completes itself in a remarkably cruel way. To preserve the very existence of the automobile, humanity has to accept that it will never be able to touch it again. Dense, raw, and highly real stories like this one prove to us, without a shadow of a doubt, that our past still fiercely guards inaccessible, monumental secrets right beneath the surface of the waters. History is not just written by victories, it is also built by the silent testimonies of the things we lost to the uncontrollable forces of nature. If you value the authentic preservation of memory, and if you appreciate understanding historical events with this exact level of sobriety, weight, and documentary respect, I ask that you subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and drop a comment below, letting us know what you thought about today's deep investigation. Your presence and your feedback are absolutely essential. It strengthens our community and directly supports the rescue and continuation of true historical research. A strong embrace, and we will see you very soon on our next deep dive into the past.